All right, guys, hope you're doing well today. I want to talk about the ongoing crisis in the English Channel today. As we all know, this saga has been ongoing now for at least, what, 8 years, I think, 7, 8 years, if not longer than that. But it's certainly been in the public's it's certainly been a major news story, let's say, for at least 5 years. And quite frankly, I think a lot of people are starting to get very, very tired of all of this. I know I am anyway. And this video is kind of really kind of inspired by, or motivated, let's say, by another YouTuber called Danny Tommo. He's a very, very courageous man who, quite frankly, has brought a lot of much needed attention on this whole issue of illegal crossings for a while now, and I think that he often, I think, doesn't often get the credit he deserves. He's an incredibly brave man, and he's really got some guts about him. I'll say that much. And it's a shame that we don't have more people like that out there doing that kind of activism, doing the kind of work of putting pressure on, putting the spotlight on these kind of on the authorities that are complicit in all of this stuff. Because really, without that collective effort, it's not enough to just. It's obviously it's a start to record what's going on in the English Channel, obviously, but without enough support, without enough people piling the pressure on, you're not going to really change anything. And I think that's why, as Danny said, as he said yesterday, you've got to have that collective. You've got to have enough people to send a message to intimidate the authorities, really, to change anything. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of mention that because that's really why I'm making this video. But I wanted to kind of run through a few things that kind of bother me about this whole situation, really. Because as far as I can tell, this is a well-oiled machine. It's a clearly very organised operation. And while I accept that there is a certain degree of international legislation that kind of makes it difficult for the British authorities to really stop this, when you bear in mind other considerations, I think there should be other factors that should trump that should actually come first, that should be seen as more of a justification to stop this. I mean, the first thing to do would be to leave the ECHR. That would be a bold move, I think, that would put the ball, at least it would get the ball rolling to the point where we could have more leverage over the situation. But whether that's going to happen in his hands soon is, I honestly don't know. But if Reform get into power, we've heard it all before that they're going to try and deal with this. I personally am skeptical about Reform for a lot of reasons. Whether it remains to be seen. We'll have to see what happens. But I'm not holding my breath, if I'm being honest with you, with Reform in almost every sense. And I think probably, unless you've got something like Restore Britain or something like Britain First, even in power, or UKIP or something like that, I think you're not really gonna see much meaningful change in really dealing with all of this stuff unless there's some like serious in something that happens in the channel at some point, maybe, or perhaps I don't know. Honestly, I don't know how this is going to end or if it ever will. But it certainly needs to. I think the first thing to say about this whole situation is this idea of humanitarianism, and that is, this idea that we as Western nations, as wealthy nations, have obligations to protect and support those that come from impoverished parts of the world, where there are problems with climate issues, where there are problems with human rights violations, where there are problems with corruption, war, famine, etc. And yeah, on the surface, you would think that as a relatively rich nation like that the UK is reported to be, apparently, you would think that should be something that we should do. And I think if your economy's doing well and generally speaking things are going well for the average person, then okay, I suppose to some extent you could justify it. But I think when your country is in such a state that it like the UK is in at the moment, I don't personally think you can justify carrying on with this stuff, because we've already got problems with our economy anyway, thanks to inflation, rising costs of living and energy, global issues causing supply chain issues. So, with regards to humanitarianism, I think, it's a bit hypocritical of the government to sit there and say that, it's our duty to pick these people up from the English Channel rather than just leaving them out there. It's like, I get it to a point, but at the same time, you don't seem to have any problems when people die, people drown, a boat sinks or some people fall off the boat or something. They talk about humanitarianism, but like they don't seem to really care that much, because if they did, they'd stop it. And what about the humanitarianism of the people of the United Kingdom? What about the support for those people who are, I assume, are probably paying for this stuff? So I don't really understand it all. And also, why at what point do you have to say that, at what point do you say that this is causing us more problems than it's benefiting us, and it's costing us, it's costing us more money than we're making money from having these people in our society. And also, is there a point where you just have to say we just can't continue like this, because it's going to buckle an already fragile ecosystem of infrastructure, of limited, increasingly limited work opportunities for people on the lower end of society. Increasing costs because of unemployment, which then of course increases the cost of welfare, and then obviously that has impacts on healthcare and things like that, and also has impacts on local authority budgets and things, which means often that services get cut, infrastructure is not taken care of, basic needs aren't always being fully met. It's a catastrophe, really. It just doesn't work, and I think in the end, I think we will have to get to a point where we just say, look, we can't really cope with anymore. We can't really handle any more people coming to our shores. Certainly not in the numbers that they are. So we're going to have to, at some stage, whether that's in the next 5 to 10 years, I don't know when. I don't have a crystal ball, and who knows whether there's the political will to solve all of this stuff. That's another issue. But at some point, we're going to have to lay down some very strict rules around, like, We're going to have a cap on immigration. We're going to have or certainly cap on immigration from certain places. We're going to have to start being very strict with regards to vetting processes. What kind of requirements that people are going to have to meet to be able to get into the UK. And I think, honestly, Border Force are going to have to, at some point, have an existential crisis, basically, and say, this is not what we are supposed to be. We are not supposed to be a facilitation outfit. We're supposed to be, the clue's in the name, Border Force. The idea is that you forcefully, if necessary, protect your borders. Of course, it's a unit, it's a force. I get that, but it's also there it's supposed to protect the borders. It's supposed to be there to protect the public, essentially, from people who, well, at least a certain percentage of people who might come to your country to do harm. And that's the issue. It's all good and well saying that you can't assume that all these people are criminals, are bad people. Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, you also can't assume that they're all decent, law abiding, morally bound, ethically conscious people. I'm sorry, but I don't want to generalize or stigmatize or demonize or make sweeping generalizations about entire group of people. No, but that's the point. That's why you have a border force. That's why you have that's the purpose of visas and passports and documents, so that you can weed. They're supposed to weed out people like that, so that you don't end up with people in your country that shouldn't be there. And maybe you can't prevent everything, but at least increase the chances that you prevent crimes from happening from people that have no right to be in your country because of their pasts. And we know that a certain percentage, I'm pretty sure, of the people coming over there on the dinghies are wrong-uns, basically. Probably people that have committed serious offences, serious crimes in their own regions of their countries. Some of them will have committed murder. Some of them will have committed acts of terrorism. Some of them will have done terrible things to children and women. Some of them will have very outdated views in regards to the way that people that are gay or lesbian should be treated, etc. Not to mention, dogmatic religious ideology, etc. And that isn't. I'm not saying that that's everybody, but that's the point of having safety measures. That's the point of having, authorities there to try and make sure that those kinds of people don't get through. But if you've got, let's say, on average on a dinghy, what is it, 100 people, maybe a little bit more. I don't know exactly, but at least about maybe 70 to 100 people, let's say. There's a very good chance, I'd say 78% chance, that at least maybe 15, maybe 20% of them might have some kind of a questionable background. That's putting it nicely. Could be more than that, I don't know. But whatever the case, you can't just assume that all of these people are, asylum seekers necessarily. Some of these people are opportunists. Some of these people are just that. That's all they are. They're just coming because they can come. And some of them are coming because some of their family members are already in the UK. And some of them are just running away from problems, probably. Some of them will be running away from serious offences that they've committed in their country of origin. So, and I think, I know that those are uncomfortable things to say, because everybody wants to have this kind of rose-tinted view that, these sort of economic migrants, I like to call them opportunists, because that's basically what they are, taking advantage of an extremely lenient disastrous operation, really. That there's clearly being funded, there's clearly organised through NGOs and charity organisations, probably with government backing or government funding in somewhere along the line, and probably lefty lawyers involved in this kind of stuff. So we know that some dodgy shit's going on here, and there's no incentive to stop it. I presume because there's too much money rolling in. It's a expensive operation, and it's costly to get life vests and dinghies, and it's costly to get vessels out the English Channel every day from the British and French sides, and God knows how much it must cost fuel to run these boats. So, not to mention all the staff that have to be paid. So, I know that I know there are voluntary organisations as well, but look, there's money being passed around here. Anyone that believes into this idea that it's just purely just smuggling gangs that are responsible for all of this, it's a very, very narrow, ignorant way to think about this, because it's a much bigger operation than that. And I think ultimately the reason why the authorities don't want to deal with this is because it's a political hot potato, because neither the French nor the English authorities want to get into some kind of grey area, serious court battle with the UN or something on human rights violations. So it's difficult because, like, on the one hand, the border force, probably some of the people that work in the border force probably do want to send these people back to France, but at the same time, if their hands are basically tied. Maybe it's cowardice probably, but you can understand it to a certain extent, because those people would lose their jobs. And I'm not justifying this, by the way. I think if any people that worked in the either side had any balls about them, they would resign. They would try to do something. But money rules the world, as they say, and people are motivated, especially with the way things are at the moment. Certainly in England, people are desperate to keep hold of their livelihoods as long as they can. So it's I can see to some extent why the authorities don't seem to be capable of doing much in terms of the authorities that are out there in the Channel. But as far as the French and the British governments are concerned, if they really wanted to, they could bring this to an end. I'm pretty sure they could, but there's no incentive to do so, because it's a money racket. It's a business, essentially, and so they don't want. There's no real incentive to stop it, and because the kind of prevailing, or what has tended to be the prevailing kind of political status quo, that being the kind of left liberal kind of outfit that most of the kind of like previous governments for the last 20, 30 years have adopted. They don't believe in protecting one's borders. They don't believe in sovereignty. They don't believe in nation states. They don't believe in nations believing that they have some identity and that they have their own kind of indigenous populations. They don't believe in any of that stuff. They believe in globalism. They believe in multiculturalism. They believe in excessive liberalism, and that's why, partly politically, why we are where we are. So we're in a serious mess here, and I just thought I'd mention some statistics, just to kind of give you some kind of idea of just how bad this whole thing is. So last year, approximately 41,000 people arrived into the UK, and only, I think it was about 305 people were returned back to France. at the time of this video, apparently it's costing roughly about it's a £660 million deal, which I suspect is probably on the more conservative, and I'm sure it's probably a lot more than that. But even if that's the case, I mean, that's a hell of a lot of money, and yet, where's the money going? Where's it going? Where do you spend £660 million on? Where? I mean, sure, even with the cost of dinghies and boat vessel maintenance, fuel costs, infrastructure, and these people's salaries and whatnot. Surely that doesn't come up to £660 million. I mean, seems a bit excessive to me. So it just, to me, we're not. If we are sending, I think it's something like £1 billion or something, or a few £1 billion over to the French authorities, that isn't money to stop it. We're not sending money over to the French to stop this. We're sending money over to the French authorities to facilitate it. And because otherwise, it's down to you. Otherwise, the French will just turn around and say, well, you're going to have to do all of this. You're going to have to sort all of it out. We're not even bothered going out into the English Channel. So it's just I think it's all handshakes. It's all closed backroom handshakes going on here. It's such a shame. And you would think that with children, as I've mentioned before, with children having died previously in this whole thing, and there's just the severe nature of this whole. I mean, let's face it. The English Channel is a dangerous place. It's on a good day it's smooth, it's calm, but it can get pretty rough out there. And you would think that if these authorities had any kind of compassion or empathy whatsoever, that there'd be willingness to try and bring this to an end. But so much for human rights. I mean, what it's like? Surely, we're signed up to the ECHR, and yet, well, then, that's just contradictory to me. It doesn't make any sense. Like, you would think with that there would be a willingness to try and end this, because it's a severe danger to life. But instead of ending it, you give everybody a life vest. It's just unbelievable, really. So apparently 300 and what's it saying here? It says, despite a UK-France funding deal of £660 million over 3 years to boost French patrols, only about 305 people were returned to France, while 367 people were accepted into the UK. So it just shows you the scale of just like how the scale of just how ineffective this whole thing is. That we're accepting more people than we're we tend to be accepting more people on average, that is, than we are returning them. It's like, sure, you're going to have cases where there might be more people returned than are accepted, but generally speaking, it seems like most of the time, most of these people are getting accepted into the UK, or at least are in a state of kind of limbo while their asylum cases are investigated and potentially accepted, which I'm sure most of them probably are. So this is a serious situation, because not only is it, as I said, a potential national safety and security risk, but it's also having massive consequences on societal change, cultural change. People in their communities, especially up north and the northeast of the country, where a lot of these people are being placed, because it's cheaper for them to be placed there. The people in those communities, are bearing the are basically having to tolerate all this stuff, and they don't have any say in it. It's just like, and that's the thing is like, the part of the reason that we had Brexit, or at least people voted for it, predominantly in those very areas I've just mentioned, is because they felt disempowered. They felt that they didn't have a voice anymore. They felt that they had been forgotten about, and that their issues weren't being taken seriously, that their voices didn't matter. And they were tired of being called bigoted and racist and fascist and all the other buzzwords. And I think, while yes, I accept that a lot of people were lied to by people like Nigel Farage, I think the core idea was that without intervention, there's nothing that Britain seems to be able to do about it unless we leave certain legislation of the EU. But then, of course, it's not as simple as it. Things aren't always simple as you think they are, and things aren't. It's messy. It's complicated, because if we do that, then yes, we could potentially lose a certain degree of influence on the world stage, I guess. Potential trade related issues with the EU market. And so it's I understand that it's complicated. I'm not saying that Brexit would have led to some kind of utopia, but ultimately the public should have been given a referendum on immigration long before 2016. I think it should have been given that, probably sometime in the 90s, really. Because I think that's really where a lot of the problems started to happen. Late 90s, early to mid 2000s, I believe, anyway. So, and the fact that the Conservative government didn't seem to want to properly leave legislation that ties us into this kind of globalist nightmare stuff surrounding immigration. It tells you everything you need to know, that they didn't believe in it, that they didn't want to risk potentially damaging, or what they felt might have been damaging, the economy in some way. But I think more than anything, there was just no political will. There was no incentive, because ideologically, even the Conservatives didn't really believe in dealing with immigration in any real efficient and effective way. So it's just shocking. And it also says here, the UK-France handoff is just a repetitive cycle. Border force picks them up. French authorities send boats back. The scale of crossings, that's 41k figure roughly. As I've said, it costs roughly about £660 million. Very few returns. I've already mentioned, the lack of transparency and all of this stuff, and that kind of tells that kind of tells you everything you need to know, really. When the British government stand up there on the, on a lectern, preaching about how we're getting immigration figures down, we're dealing with this problem, we're sending money to the French to deal with this. What they really mean is that, yeah, immigration is coming down legally speaking, but illegally it's probably just as high, or even higher than it's ever been, especially now with summer not too far around the corner. And basically, when they say that they're paying money to the French authorities, what they really mean is they're paying money to the French authorities to organise this, to make sure that it's a smooth crossing. Pardon my pun, but essentially it's a smooth operation. So like I said at the start, it's a well-oiled machine. So and as I said, there are NGOs, charities that operate in this whole thing, like Refugee Action, Migrants Rights Network, um, Utopia 56, and Medicine du Monde. I think that's how you pronounce it. There might be others, I'm sure, but and I'm sure there are probably other smaller charities involved in this in some way, probably as well. But those seem to be the key ones. So, yeah, I don't know how this ends, but it'll either end in some kind of tragedy at some point, major tragedy in the English Channel, perhaps, or it will come down to some kind of a terrorist incident, probably, or something like that. You know, whatever the case may be, this surely can't go on forever, can it? I mean, this is costing the taxpayer a fortune. And not to mention the backlash as well from the public. And as we've seen in the last couple of years, is more and more kind of anti-immigration sentiment out there. I don't blame them, really. When these people are getting put up in nice hotels, getting nice clothes, nice meals, getting jobs that really should be given to British people, not to people who've just arrived on a dinghy. This is just breeding resentment, bitterness, hatred, and if we're not careful, there will come a point where the public says, "Look, we've raised our concerns with the authorities time and time again. We asked you to do something about this in 2016. You've continually dismissed our concerns and deliberately sabotaged any efforts to try and or just deliberately ignored any opportunities to try and deal with this through legal means." And I think at some point the public is just going to turn around and say, "Look, we don't have any faith in you to deal with any of this stuff anymore. We've tried. We gave you the benefit of the doubt. We gave you a chance." And when that happens, when people get that desperate that they no longer have any faith in those institutions anymore, such as the Home Office, the Border Force, the RNLI, the government in general, and any other bodies that are involved in this in some way, which will happen eventually, then that's when things will get dangerous. That's when people will start to take matters into their own hands. Whether that's teaming up and going out there into the Channel to try and block the boats or something like that, I don't know, or intimidate the authorities in some way, pressure them. I don't know, but clearly something is going to happen at some point where the public say, you clearly have no intentions of stopping this. And quite frankly, I'm tired of having my money be put into a pot to pay for all of this stuff when I don't want it. And because of that, now I'm going to start taking matters into my own hands. And that's when you'll start to see things get very interesting and probably quite ugly. And it's almost as if the authorities want that to happen in a way. It's almost like they're just waiting for people to snap. They're waiting for people to collectivise and take action, because then they can introduce some new legislation, some new rules, laws to try and strip away whatever fragments of freedom or agency empowerment you had anyway. So this is a disaster waiting to happen. Mark my words. Whatever, something will happen eventually. I think that will force this, that will force the government's hands, and that they will have to bring it to an end. I'm pretty sure of it. And what you need, I think, we need to have. Well, first of all, we need to have a change of government in the UK. That's the first thing, because Labour's clearly not going to do anything whatsoever to try and intervene in all this. So Labour's, I don't think I'd personally don't have any faith in Labour to deal with this. So whether reform get in 2029 and deal with this is yet to be seen. I personally don't think they'll. Look, I don't. I don't know, but my guess is that they will probably struggle to really deal with this, and so then people will start to turn probably to Restore Britain, Rupert Lowe's party, probably, or other alternatives. The kind of fringe parties, let's call them, even though I don't know whether that's really fair phrase word to use, but that's often how they're deemed to be. I don't know. I don't know how the government, the prime minister, can stand up there and really look the British public in the eyes and say that we're dealing with this when it's so obvious, blatantly obvious that not only are you not dealing with this, but there's no end in sight to this, and this could potentially go on for years. And we know that pretty much every day that more and more dinghies are coming across the English Channel from France and are being picked up in the halfway mark between France and England, and the authorities are there always to deal with it. It's like I said, the authorities know what's going on. They know what's happening here. They know that these people have collectivised and organised to such an extent that, and with the help of NGOs and charities, that they were able to get onto the beaches and into the dinghies. And the authorities don't seem to want to, unless the media's there, that is, to want to deal with this. They don't seem to have any interest in preventing it. They just let them get on the boats and off they go. It's like, well, no, it's not our problem, never mind. We've done our bit. And that's basically what's going on. There's no sense of responsibility, accountability from either side. It's just like, yeah, we'll help to transfer them over to the authorities in England, but that's about it as far as the French side's concerned. And then the British pick them up, take them to some facilities in Dover or wherever else they go. Then they go through some kind of a probably pretty shallow vetting process of some sort, probably, and then eventually they get shipped out to hotels and to former Air Force bases and things like that in parts of the country that don't, quite frankly, don't want these people. And it's just spitting in the public's face. It's talk about kicking people while they're down. While people are already struggling, where they look around their towns and cities and think, what happened to this place? Like, where did things go wrong? It's like, yeah, I accept that there's it's not, but the thing, we get told that these gang smuggling, morally bankrupt pieces of crap, are profiting from this. I have no doubt that they probably are, right? But at the same time, it's not just an issue of those people if they even exist. We get told that they are. Whether that's actually true or not, I even if it is true, there's no efficient structure framework from the French authorities, the government there, or the government in England, to deal with this. The French don't seem to be able to turn them away from their side. The British we don't seem to be able to take, we get them handed over to us from the French, and we don't seem to be able to do anything about it. Once we've got them, that's it. We're stuck with them, basically. And in a way, that's a kind of a form of exploitation as well, because we can't, they're exploiting us, but kind of we're exploiting them for money as well, because we're getting paid a lot of money to do this. So I think that it's as much a problem of the people themselves on the dinghies, and the NGOs and charities, but it's also the governments as well. It's their systems that are allowing this to go on that are also, if not perhaps the biggest issue here, is that they don't want to deal with it. That's the truth. They don't want to deal with it. They want to keep the kicking the can down the road. It's not a problem. We'll just do what we have to do. Let's not go down that route. Let's not. Just don't rock the boat too much. Just do your job. Just keep your head down. Just whatever. If there are consequences, there are consequences. That's basically the general attitude. Never mind putting women and children at risk. Nah, I don't want that. And let's be honest about it. The vast majority, as you can see in the picture behind me, most of them are men. Most of the people coming on these dinghies are men, are relatively young men, or actually young men. It can't be that bad wherever they've come from, because if it was that bad, then why do we hardly ever see any children? Why do we hardly ever see any women? And you could say, well, that's because they're making the trip in order so that their other family can come over through legal means at some point. I don't believe that. Surely if it's that bad, then all of you would be on that boat. All of your immediate family would be on that boat. So I think these people are opportunists. That's what they are. That's what they should be called. They're opportunists. And you could say that some of them might be taking risks because they are desperate. Fine. But, surely if you're that desperate, you get the money and you try to do things through legal means because of the potential of consequences of you doing illegal things. And also, let's make another point here. If you're willing to break into the UK illegally, and I'm not being funny, and I'm not trying to make assumptions about, trying to be unfair or anything, but, if you're willing to break into the country legally, then that kind of tells me that you don't respect the country. You don't respect its laws. You don't respect its people. You don't respect its society. And you think that you can just do whatever you want. So there's this prevailing entitlement of these people that they've got, well, I'm black, so therefore I've got some right to come and rock up on your shore and just immediately get asylum, to be given money, because I've come from Somalia, I've come from Sudan, I've come from Iraq, Afghanistan, or wherever. And even if there is a limited amount of legal routes, that doesn't justify you breaking into the country. Because if you've come over on a dinghy, you are by default a criminal. You are a criminal. You've broken the law. The law does not allow you to enter the country through those means. You aren't allowed to do that if you have no documents. So you're not allowed to, and that's the thing. Most of these people don't carry documents with them, so we don't know who they are. We don't know where every single person's come from necessarily. We have a rough idea, but we don't know exactly in a lot of the cases. Or certainly not necessarily specific parts of the nations where they've come from. So we don't know a lot about these people. They often get rid of the documents long before they arrive, long before they get on the dinghies. And that's incredibly dangerous. As because of the reasons I've mentioned before. So, and the media doesn't help as well, because especially left-wing based biased media like Sky News, Channel 4, BBC, for example, they try and spin all this. It's like some poor asylum seekers, just trying to make a better life for themselves. And this poisonous attitude of like, well, if you don't support this, you're xenophobic. You're bigoted. You're a fascist. You're anti-immigration. You're somehow some kind of enemy to the state or something, because you don't agree, because you don't think that this is an appropriate way to carry on. So suddenly you're the enemy, and not these people who are breaking into the country legally. Fucking insanity. And the reason, by the way, that a lot of these people can't be deported is because once they've rocked up on British soil, the UK basically has basically not really that much choice but to essentially keep a lot of them on in the UK, because of the not only because of silly little claims of human rights violations, but also because of the ECHR, Human Rights Act, and all that kind of stuff. Unless it's like exceptional circumstances, we can't really send a lot of these people back to France or directly back to their own countries. So this is the problem. It's not just a political issue. It's a legislation issue. It's an international law monopoly power kind of a thing. And the thing is, it's not like, and let's be honest here, it's not like the authorities don't know what's happening, because they have teams on the ground. They have French police. They have drones. They have boats. They have police helicopters. They have police boats and jet skis and things like that. So it's not like they don't know what's happening here. I'm sure this is all very much being closely monitored most of the time. So they can't use that excuse as, we don't really know where they're coming from or where they're getting onto these things. They know exactly what's going on. They know when it's happening, where it's happening, roughly how many people are on the boats. They know roughly how long it's taken them to get into because they can follow on maritime apps and things like that. So there's air surveillance, there's maritime surveillance going on. So it's a shocking state. It's all complicit. It's a complicit operation. It's basically a contract, really. It's a business operation, and both sides know that, and that's why none of them really want to fully deal with this, even though there are serious issues with all of this stuff. And even if some of these people do have genuine cases, I think that, let's be honest about this here. I think the UK has done far more than it should ever have done as far as humanitarian effort. I think we've done more than our fair share over the last 70, 80 years, however long it's been since the Windrush generation. So I think we've done far more. We've done our bit. We really have. And I think, quite frankly, I think it's about time that a lot of other bigger European countries started doing their fair share, or other countries around the world started taking, if necessary, some of these people, because the UK is a small country. It's a country in severe either decline or at least stagnation, economically speaking, and it just doesn't, I don't think, really have the capabilities for this to continue to go on for too much longer. It's going to cause, I think at some point shit is going to hit the fan, and it's going to get very, very messy unless the governments decide to stop it. And my fear is that because so much money is being handed around here, so many people in different financial pies, that there's no motivation to bring it to an end. People are profiting off of it. And even if, like I said, even if some of these people are escaping conflict and poverty, why is it the responsibility of the UK to take all of these people all the time? Why? Why do we have to take all of them? Why can't we send half of them back to France? Why can't we send 70 or 80% of them back to France? Why can't we just? Why is it our obligation to deal with all of this stuff? Even if we are signed up to EU legislation, international law, it's like, surely we must have some grounds where we can justify saying, we can't afford this anymore. We can't go on this way because it's causing endless problems. There must be some way that we can make a case that we must be allowed to leave the legislation that's stopping us politically from preventing this and stopping it. And like I said, not to mention all of the costs of all of this stuff. God knows how much it must cost to all of these HMO places and like contracts with hotels and transport companies that are moving around the country, and it must cost a fortune. It's just wrong. It really is wrong. The people that are supporting this are nothing but morally bankrupt, authoritarian loving scum, really, quite frankly. And the longer that this goes on, the more the threat this is to our nation and to the people in it. At some point, there will be some incident, some major terrorist attack, more and more assaults, more and more issues because of some of the people that come from very oppressive regimes, oppressive places that bring their problems with them to the UK, that don't just disappear once they step off that boat. They are part of who they are, their attitudes, their biases, their beliefs, their behaviours, their overall identity is tied up in those things. And we mustn't forget that. And, at some point, somebody in the government, somebody in the maritime authorities, somebody involved in the various contracts that are going on here has to stand up and say, I don't want to do this, and I'm going to take this stuff to court. I'm going to start making a case to try and bring this to an end, or at least put pressure on authorities to try and stop it. And I think that's what you need. You need some whistleblowers. You need some people to come out and say, look, this is what's really going on here. Don't believe the media. Don't believe the narrative that the government spins. It's all bullshit. It's all lies. It's all a facade. And, maybe then things might start to change, because if they've got evidence to back it up, with documents, with footage, with calls, with messages, etc., then you can start to potentially build a case here and say, look, we've been misled, we've been lied to. And the government should be held to account for it. It genuinely should. Because that's the thing, is that we know that the government can't be trusted. We know that the media are not on our side. They're businesses. They have the biases. They're basically working hand in hand with political systems, really, because they're essentially basically the same thing. So I don't believe a word that comes out of Keir Starmer's mouth. I don't believe a word that comes out of Labour's mouth, or the Conservatives. The Conservatives can sit there and say, we tried to do things. Well, you didn't do much, because you had 14 years in power and the crossings were coming under your watch. I think they started, 2019, 2020, I think, or at least were starting to be documented by that point. So this has been ongoing for a very long time, many years before Labour got to power. And here we are, almost 3 years into Labour's term in office, and what have they done? They haven't stopped it. And like I said, it's because they don't want to. It's just as simple as that. They just don't want to do it, and quite frankly, they don't have to. They don't have to do it. So, in their eyes, they just think, well, just sell the public some spin. Put on some fake empathy, some fake, solidarity with the public's outrage at this whole thing. And just keep pretending that this isn't a much more serious issue than it really is. And with all of the security firms and things like that involved in this as well. It's as much an operation as it is a corrupt one. It's about money. It's about politics. It's about ideology. It's about business. It's about leverage, I suppose. Globalism, definitely. So there are a lot of factors in this, and the Office for National Statistics, I'm sure, is probably lying to us as well about the figures and everything. So I wouldn't really put any. Personally, I wouldn't believe any of the official narrative, any of the official story, any of the official statistics and things like that, because often things are often manipulated to make it look a certain way, and the fact that the public doesn't have any real say, that the public doesn't get to have a voice, on this. In my opinion, we should probably have a referendum on. We should have a referendum on this particular matter. Do you want the crossings in the English Channel to stop? Yes or no? And I think probably the vast majority of people would say yes, which is why the authorities don't want the public to have such a thing. And also, they would just turn around and say, "Well, you've had Brexit." Well, did we? Doesn't seem like it. I mean, look how many boats are coming across every day, every week now since spring. This is madness. It's fucking madness. It's madness. It just makes the authorities look good. It makes them look moral and righteous. Look what we're doing for the underdogs. Look what we're doing for the impoverished types. Look what we're doing for people escaping war, claiming to be escaping war. Look what we're doing. We're doing the right thing. We're playing our role in humanitarian effort to deal with this thing. But at the end of the day, it's all image. It's all optics. It makes us look good. It makes us look good on the international stage. That we're doing our part. We're playing our part. The globalist effort. And with all of the bureaucratic processes, as I've mentioned throughout this video, unless you can sort all that stuff out, it doesn't matter how much will the public have to try and get the authorities to deal with it. If they don't, first of all, if they don't believe in it, then you've got no chance. And secondly, if there's too much bureaucracy involved in it, then a lot of people they don't want to get involved in it because of that as well. So, this is all tied up in red tape, unfortunately. And I mean, the amount of money that could be spent on other things. If it's true that £660 million are going into this thing, imagine where that money could be spent. It could be spent on creating new industries, new jobs, building new infrastructure, better public transport, money being pummeled into the education system, or healthcare. It's wrong, man. This is wrong. This is immoral. It's unethical. It's not right. This is unfair. This is unfair to the taxpayer. This is unfair to people that get out there and contribute to society and do their bit because they think that that's the right thing to do. And it is the right thing to do. But what isn't right is that their hard-earned money gets pushed away into other things that they have no say in. They have no control over. How is that in any way right? How is that fair? It's fucking corrupt. That's a corrupt system. And then they complain about people being unemployed. It's like, well, I mean, can you blame people if that's the system that you have? That when people do put in effort, when people do go to work, that they get taxed out of existence, basically, and with a cost of living crisis that sees no end in sight. People can't afford to. People can't. It's like people think to themselves, well, what's the point? What's the point getting up in the morning at 6 o'clock? And I'm not saying that's right, but I mean, you can't blame people. This is wrong, man. This is wrong. not to mention issues of like integration, things like that, and ethnic like silos, segregation and the division of all of the language that politicians use, and that they try to portray anyone that's critical or has a different opinion than the status quo narrative to be as if they're all far right bigots, horrible, nasty individuals. Is How does that help anybody? How in any way does that make people feel like they're being listened to? Oh, by the way, you're all bigots and fascists because you don't agree with illegal crossings in the English Channel. What, you think that's really helpful? Do you? That's the approach you're going to take to millions of people who are frustrated and angry, and quite frankly are getting more and more apathetic towards democracy and politics in general. And you wonder why people are voting for people like Reform UK. You wonder why people are returning to parties like Restore Britain. You wonder why people are turning to parties like Greens, because the Conservatives have failed, Labour's failed, and people are desperate for change. They're looking for something to bring these kind of issues to an end, because it's costing a fortune. It's costing a fortune. We can't go on like this. We can't. This has got to end at some stage. This really has got to stop. And my heart goes out to the public. It really does. I feel sorry for them. It's. I don't really know what else I can say. Really, it's such a shame. It's such a shame. What can the public do? I mean, you can't break the law. You're not allowed to cross certain boundaries. So what are you to do? What are you to do as the general public? What can people do? They can raise awareness. They can go out there and film. They can put pressure on the authorities, but that's all they can do. It's like the public don't have the money and the infrastructure and the vessels that the border force has and things like that. And maybe it will have to come down to eventually some grassroots led operation in which enough of the public get out there in their own boats and basically form a kind of like basically block these vessels from gaining access to the border force or something like that. Maybe you don't intervene with the boats, but you block them essentially, or you try and block the border force. You circle around them or something. Maybe that's what you have to do, and that's how you bring this to an end. There has to be a solution, because if the government will just not do it, then in the end, I guess it is down to the public to sort this out. But how do you do that? How do you do that without breaking the law? How do you do that without making things worse for you? How do you make it? How do you put pressure on to such an extent that you intimidate government into putting in plans to properly deal with this? I don't know what the answer to that is, really. I mean, I think it probably will have to come down to some kind of operation by the public in enough numbers in the English Channel, which is basically what I think I don't know for sure, but I think probably something like Danny Tommo wants to do. But unless you get that, unless you've got enough backing, support, money to do that, it's going to be very difficult. And probably probably the government will respond with harsher crackdowns and new laws, and they'll just change. They'll just intervene in some other way. So they might stop the English Channel crossings, but then something might happen in some other way. So they'll get around it somehow, probably. So I don't know how. I think the solution to this really is The only real solution, as far as I can tell, is a complete political change of direction. That's how we deal with this. Now, whether that turns out to be via reform, I don't know. I'm doubtful. But let's see. I guess we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's see. I'm not holding out too much for them, though, honestly. But I definitely think that if reform don't gain the respect and trust of the public, then you will see eventually probably Restore Britain become the next biggest party in the UK, I suspect, at some point in the 2030s. And if it's not Restore Britain, then you might see another wave of support for the UK, for UKIP or something like that, maybe even Britain First or something. Because I think people will then at that point they'll just throw caution to the windows. They'll just say, look, you were supposed to be the party, Reform UK, we gave you support, we believed in you, and you let us down. So now you can go screw yourselves, and you're also going to be confined to the political dustbin of history. So it's really on Reform to make sure that they get it right, because if they don't, we are in very, very serious trouble. And before that, we need more and more pressure in the English Channel to try and to intimidate the authorities into stopping it. That's the only thing we can do right now. But how you do that, like I said, how you do that without breaking laws, I don't know. I don't know what you can do here as an average citizen. I don't really know, apart from writing to your MP, writing to the government, filming things, trying to build some kind of case if you've got the money and the support against the government somehow. But you're always going to be up against international law. You're always going to be up against the legislation of the EU. So we need a party that deals with those things. My hope is that Reform will be that. But my fear, and the pessimist in me, says that they won't be able to do it. But I don't know why, but that's my fear, is that they'll come up against all sorts of barriers in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords, and that's why probably in the end the political solution might not even be possible. It might just be that at some point what you've got to have is enough people out there on boats protecting their own shores, basically, with the help of former military people or something like that. I don't know, but it's probably going to have to come down to something like that. I don't want to see people turn to violence or doing things that could threaten people's lives. But I do fear that if we don't resolve this in the coming years, that's where we're going to end up. So that's all I have to say about this whole thing. I hope there's a peaceful and democratic solution planned to sort this out eventually. But if I'm being honest, I don't think there will be. Let me know what you think. Okay, that's enough for today. Thank you very much. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll get back to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.